Our next speakers are Andrew Perchik and David Turnbull. Andrew is the Assistant Director of Contemporary Programs and Research at the Getty Research Institute. Andrew was also a guiding light behind this conference and putting together with his other colleagues at the Getty, the steering committee, and so I thank you, Andrew, for that as well as his contribution. David Turnbull is Assistant Conservator at the Denver Art Museum, and they're going to discuss James Turrell, Trace Elements, Light into Space.
Good afternoon. I thought I'd start by giving a very brief outline of why we thought David's proposal was so exciting for this particular conference. And that is because the entire day-to-day represents engagement with artists or their representatives on a number of levels and of different types. Obviously, beginning with Mondrian, who was dead before many of the people in this room were born, and almost every, if not every person, I think that Nancy Troy mentioned probably is also dead. The Liechtenstein Foundation, which has been around for about 10 years and has been wonderful to work with, as anybody which is not always true of foundations and estates. And then coming to James Turrell, who is both a living artist and a living artist who has been very involved with the conservation issues in his work and openly admits that his intention for the type of pieces that we're going to be talking about have changed over the years. So that was one element about Turrell in this piece that was so interesting. And then the second is that the piece is completely undocumentable in any objective sense, unphotographable. This is the falsest of simulacra. David actually has come up, we'll talk at the end, with a couple of objective measurements for this piece, but we're really relying almost entirely on people's subjective experience and their memories. So with that, I thought we could start by just giving you the physical components of this work. This is from Turrell's Space Division series, and I'll let David take over.
Thanks, Andrew. This piece, actually we'll just...
Oh, sorry.
This piece was actually commissioned for the Denver Art Museum in 1993 for an exhibition entitled Visions of America, Landscape as Metaphor in the Late 20th Century. It was originally installed at the Denver Art Museum in 1994, was then reinstalled 1996 or 1997, and then it was reinstalled again in 2006. And as Andrew said, this is a piece from his Space Division construction series. And essentially, this is a room that you walk into divided by a wall. You have two spaces. The space that you're in is referred to as the viewing space. The space on the other side of the wall is what he refers to as the sensing space. And the sensing space, illustrated in this image, is the purple or the blue color. And this is illuminated to produce a Ganzfeld, which is a field of shadowless light. So this is the original plans for trace elements as drawn by James Turrell. The image on your right shows a floor plan of the space. You walk into a space and the room is about 30 feet by 30 feet. And there's a division, a wall with a rectangular hole in it, which he refers to as an aperture. The aperture is illustrated on the left. It's actually in the vertical orientation. It should be horizontal. And it shows where the ultraviolet fluorescent bulbs go around the edge of the aperture to illuminate the space inside. This is a view of the aperture. This photo was actually taken as the piece was being deconstructed in July of 2007. So you can see it literally is just a hole in the wall. All the walls are painted white. There's also a white drop ceiling. This is a view taken from inside of the aperture during the strike of the installation. And you can see around the inside edge of the aperture there's a strip of black, and that's a recess within the wall where these fluorescent tubes are placed. And the actual edge of the aperture is quite sharp. I'll just see if I can see this on the slide up here. You can see there's a bit of a bevel to this edge, so it's actually quite a sharp edge, and this helps to produce the illusion of the Ganzfeld as well. You can also see that the sensing space inside has these 90-degree sharp corners. And this is a cross-section of his original drawings of the edge of the aperture. So you can see that it's got about a 15-degree angle on it. This is just a shot of some of the light bulbs that were used in the piece. The bulb on the very bottom, it's just a black light blue fluorescent bulb, a standard 2-pin 4-foot bulb. It's got black electrical tape around it. The tubes that are above it in the image are actually coated in a theater gel.
And one of the reasons, I think you were telling me, that the necessity of wrapping the tubes and gelling them is the change in fluorescent technology since the piece was developed.
Right. This is what James had told me when I interviewed him, was that this piece now is about 15 years old, 14, 15 years old. The change in fluorescent tube technology from the time when this piece was originally conceived has changed. The bulbs now have lower mercury content. All of these bulbs are attached to standard dimmer switches so that they can be ramped up or run down to effectively tune the piece. And the mercury content in the fluorescent bulbs is so low now that it's really just intended to last the expected life of the bulb. When there was excess amounts of mercury in the bulbs, you could actually dim these bulbs down to about 8% of their necessary voltage to run at full power. Now, what he's told me was that they're lucky if they can run it down to about 30% before the bulbs burn out.
So to get the diffuse and very low light necessary, most of the light has to be passed out from what's coming out of the tubes.
Exactly, and the theater gels are used because the deep blue saturated color that you were originally able to perceive from the original installations, or that the older bulbs emitted, is harder to pick up now with these lower mercury content bulbs. So they use theater gel sleeves to kind of give a sense of that color using these newer bulbs.
So now that we've sort of gone through the basic physical components, Turrell has also sort of storyboarded for us what the experience of the piece, the progression of the experience of the piece is.
And what we have, this comes with the piece when the piece is purchased. What he's done is he's drawn some distinguishing features of part of what the experience of trace elements is meant to be. So the first thing that you see, he even specifies that because this is a time-based, perception-based piece, there's not a lot of change that happens as you walk into this darkened space until about 10 minutes or so. You don't really get a lot of variation. There is a kind of a pink dawning. There's one red fluorescent bulb at the lower center. This creates a pink dawning. After a while, that starts to become less prominent.
Meaning that when David says pink dawning, the monochromatic field of the aperture, which you initially see, starts to have a semicircle of pink coming up from the bottom of your perception.
Right, exactly. So as you, the longer that you spend in it, the more that you see. Based on these drawings and from talking to Turrell, this is a piece that really is meant to be interacted with. Some of his pieces, you go and you can just sit and things will happen as your eyes adjust. This is a piece where you really do need to get up, you need to interact with it. So the first image here shows that there's a kind of a red glow that follows you as you walk back and forth in front of the piece about 10 to 12 feet out. The lower sketch shows that there's also this kind of darkening that follows you as well. And as you stand a few feet out from it and you look at an angle, this you can see why the sharp edge of this aperture is so important. And it's so that it will help provide this kind of screening effect, really so that you don't really see any kind of physical edge right along here.
One of the things, that Turrell's done very occasionally is, while storyboarding this experience, he's completely left out the experience that most people remember most prominently from this piece, which is that at a certain point, the light begins to granulate and the room fills with what seems to be a sort of mist coming out at you. So, which is just to say that this is not either a complete description of the experience, nor is one possible. Neither David nor I, at any point of looking at this piece, did all of the steps that Turrell takes you through actually happen in our perception. So I think now we could turn from Turrell's mapping of the piece to the reinstallation of the piece at Denver and the rather amazing story of its refinement over about a 9-month period.
I should also add that there are elements of this piece that are not described within these steps that Turrell outlines. Everyone that had been present for the previous installations in 94 and then in 96 or 97 talk about this deep blue saturation, this kind of awe-inspiring, magical moment where this blue form starts to just hover in front of you. And this is something that we didn't experience either. And it's also something that isn't outlined within the piece, nor does he actually tell you about, how far you have to be in the piece, like how long you should be in it before some of these other features start to happen.
So, when was the first reinstallation? And I believe it was one of Turrell's assistants who came in and did that.
It was. We had, the piece was going to be reinstalled. We had the opening of the Hamilton wing of the Denver Art Museum. This piece we wanted to get up and running for the opening as well. And so in July of 2006, Turrell's assistant, Matt Schreiber, came to work on the piece. And at this point, Turrell was supposed to have come with him, but for whatever reasons couldn't make it at the time. I was sent to see what I could do about documenting what Matt was doing. And at this point, I had absolutely no experience with this piece at all. I had no idea that this room had been built anywhere in the museum. And so at the last minute, I was able to grab the video camera and do a little bit of an impromptu interview while he was lighting the piece. So what he started to do was he initially started to wrap these tubes in the black electrical tape. because of the changes. He started to put theater gels on. In the end, what we learned from him was that this is a very complex piece to be able to install properly. We also learned that it's an extremely subjective piece. Everyone's memories of it seem to be a little bit different, and not everyone was pleased.
You also learned, I believe, that Matthew Schreiber was saying that Turrell now wants the pieces to be darker than they were 15 years ago.
He does, yeah, and this is what he refers to as paying the price of admission for his pieces. He deliberately wants people to go into his spaces and spend 15, 20, 25 minutes. These really aren't pieces that can be fast-forwarded for your experience, but by lowering the light levels even further, I think he can slow down the process and really make the reward worth it.
And there was some institutional unhappiness with the piece after Matthew Schreiber left, and the next step was that you were able to get Turrell himself to come out and tune, as he calls it, the piece. So maybe you could tell us what that process.
Sure. The first thing that James Turrell did when he came, we initially went into the space. He got a sense of what was going on, what some of the concerns were with the people who had been there when Matt had tuned it. He felt that the piece was too light. He wanted it to go a little bit darker. There are a few other things that... sorry.
But so he restriped, he did this, the tuning process, which is playing with the side light levels, striping and gelling the tubes, and got it to a certain state. And how did you all feel at the end? I think he spent an entire day there.
He did. He spent an entire day. And the amount of time that he spent is important because originally Turrell himself would go and he would help construct these pieces. He would be on site tuning them for a number of days. Matt Schreiber came for 1 day. James Turrell came for 1 day. In the end, everyone felt pretty good about it. We were excited that we had the artist there, that we were able to work with him and get a sense from him how the piece should be working, how it should be tuned. He also, well, when he left, everyone was fairly pleased. I was able to ask him about how he felt about it, and his initial comment was, well, it's good enough for contemporary art. And that was it. He left.
But as people experienced the piece after Turrell left, good enough didn't seem quite good enough anymore.
Yeah, it didn't quite cut it. Basically, I think, too, because everyone had spent an entire day in there, we had 8 hours in the room, you really need to go out, come back in, let your eyes readjust, and re-experience the piece from beginning to end. And I think at that point, everyone's eyes and perceptions and senses were just so exhausted that you could almost convince yourself of anything that you were seeing. One of the main things, though, was that they felt that the sides were actually imbalanced within the aperture, and this was something that absolutely had to be corrected because it destroyed the illusion of this Ganzfeld within the aperture.
And so I think it was around last January that there was a third tuning supervised by your curator at the time. And as you've noticed, we're not showing images at this point because these are completely subjective, but we do have some sound clips of people describing what they were going for.
We do. And we should also say one of the driving forces, too, Diane Vanderlip, the curator at the time, was retiring at the end of January. One of the last things that she and the installation crew, we all wanted to do was make sure that we really got this piece to a point where we were comfortable with it before she left. We all felt that she probably had one of the best senses of it. She had a very close relationship with the artist, and she really knew what she wanted.
So I think first we're going to play a clip that really gives a sense of both how intricate but also how imprecise tuning one of these pieces is.
Can you touch the blue just a little bit more? Because when you did it this time, it started to make the sides blue, because the top is still red.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that it's kind of coming.
So we're in agreement with it's the sides you want to take up?
Well,
take up the top.
The top. Start with the top.
Or actually, if Diane's concerned about the red, then it's actually the bottom I need to buff up a little bit. John, right?
You brought up anything that bring up the bottom.
That's what that, yeah. Diane's concerned about the red.
So wait a minute.
You know, we're going to start bringing out our corners when we start messing with it.
When you say you're going to bring up the bottom, are you talking about bringing the red up at the bottom?
No, I'm talking about bringing the blue up at the bottom.
So obviously what you heard is them adjusting. Each tube has its own dimmer, and they're bringing them up and down. And I think Diane was also very clear about why she felt this further tuning was necessary.
Yeah, we have another sound clip for that, but I'll just kind of preface it first. I think that there was a general sense that, when Turrell came out, he came because of a personal favor to Diane. As I said, they have a fairly close relationship. She let him know that she wanted the piece that she had bought, not an updated, not a retuned Turrell, and she felt that what Matt had given her was not what that was. And so as we went back into it, there was also the feeling that Turrell himself hadn't given Diane or the rest of the institution what the piece was initially.
We didn't buy the dark piece, and when James was here, I was pretty insistent that I wanted the piece that we bought. And I think
his reaction to that?
he said, "Yeah, you're right." He said, "Yeah, you're right." I mean, you take an aperture and you take this many variables with light. He could make 45 different pieces, 100. He could make innumerable other pieces with what we've got in this room. I wanted the piece that we bought. It was called Trace Elements. It was inspired, James said, by the way, the sun rises, and you get this trace of a dawning on it, and that's the piece that I wanted, where you go out on a morning like this, and you just see that blush of red and that strange color the sky is in early morning, and I think that's what we've got now. And the longer you stay there, the bluer it gets. And I think that lack of blueness was what I was most troubled by. That kind of atmospheric blue. It's not a gray.
So there was this third tuning, and I think you were all pretty satisfied after that one.
Yeah, there was a consensus that it was as close as they had gotten to that date, to what they remembered. And I was asked myself if this was the best that I'd ever seen it, and of course my experience with the piece, with any sense of blue, was seeing it in a book or on a slide. The image that we first showed, which is of course inaccurate. It doesn't really give you a sense of the piece at all.
But to some degree, the odyssey continued, and there was still some dissatisfaction, and ultimately a fourth tuning of the piece. Is that?
That's right. There was still a sense. The fourth tuning happened in July of 2007. I was able to interview the museum director, Louis Sharp, the interim curator at the time as well, and the head of exhibition collection services. These were another three people who all had quite a bit of experience with the Turrell in the earlier installations as well. And the overall sense was that this still isn't close. It doesn't have the blue. It doesn't have the magic. It's just not magical. It doesn't give this kind of awe-inspiring moment for you. There was also some other issues where they felt that institutionally the piece just might not be safe for the audience at these lower levels as well.
I right now feel that this is the sense of when I used to come in, I could get a sense that someone's over there looking, but I could also, right now you're so uncomfortable in defining your space or knowing your space that you can't even have any other experience. If you can't have some sense that you're not going to fall off or bump into somebody or do something, you have to have those two accomplished. You have to have a sense that there is an aperture to focus on, and two, you have a sense of your space.
So is it this stage that I went out to flew out to Denver, and David and I were able to experience the piece together, and luckily we were able to do it at the light levels that had been turned up based on this fourth tuning, and I should have let you actually say what happened.
What the suggestion was, because the viewing space itself was so dark, that they felt that it was so dark, the suggestion was to bring up the side lights to give the ambient light within the whole viewing space a little bit more lift. Of course, these side lights also reflect into the aperture, so they also lighten that space as well. Before I made any adjustments to it, I contacted the artist. I wanted to make sure that he was aware of what we were doing, and that he was aware that all of these changes had happened since he came and tuned it and then left. His initial response was to just leave it, and he'll deal with it the next time it's installed. He'll come down himself and do it. And the way that I put it to him was that, well, this way we can, if there's some way that we can record what this is, then the next time you come, maybe we can use this as a jumping off point to be able to somehow get it back to this point for him.
So going back to when David and I were experiencing it together, what we did is spent the morning in the piece with the elevated light levels on the side, went out and had lunch and let our eyes return to normal, and then came back in with the light levels, the lower light levels that from Turrell's and Diane Vanderlip's tuning. And to me, the big difference was that at the higher light levels, things happened, the stages between the piece happened much more quickly. The move from purple to pink to blue to silver, and also that feeling of the granulated, the sort of spectacular moment also happened much more quickly. In the lower light levels, the color and intensity of each stage was much greater, even though the transitions were much, much slower.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And of course, in lower light levels, although it takes longer, your eyes actually will see a deeper, more saturated color at these lower light levels than at brighter lights, or brighter levels.
And then turning back from the subjective to what, to the possibility of some objective measurement of this piece. David has done some research to give at least a baseline.
Right, and this was with the help of Turrell's assistant as well. Although my first inclination was to turn to something like a Munsell hue chart, trying to get a sense of, first of all, I had to get a sense of what it was that I'm actually trying to document and what the piece is. Unfortunately, through this whole process of the year, I was able to get a sense of what the piece is, but never got to a point where everyone could agree on what the piece was. So I'm almost back at square one. The colors that we're kind of going for, I'm guessing, are somewhere within this range here, somewhere around there. So the initial idea was that, well, if we had some kind of color chips with different hues, different shades, different lightnesses, we could actually go into the space figure out what color that is somehow in the dark, and be able to have that as our objective standard. Of course, this makes absolutely no sense. You're dealing with colored light, reflected light, as opposed to a solid color that you've got to run in, experience the piece for however many minutes, run outside, try and remember what this color was, point to it, run back in. I mean, it's completely ludicrous. So that got tossed out the window pretty quickly.
But you did come up with at least something that might be able to be recreated if technology doesn't change for the next time.
That could help us out for the next time around. We had tried to record light levels within the space. The problem with trying to record the levels in the aperture are that they're so low that they don't register on a light meter. The spotlights on either sides of the piece within your viewing space, what we were getting was around 0.001 foot candles. So it's not really useful data, and even then it's completely uneven washes of light. One thing we were able to do was actually, these are the dimmer switches that control the tracks for all of the fluorescents and the halogens. And so we were able to actually record the voltages that was going through. The idea with this is that if the technology doesn't change, if this piece is recreated using the same materials, the same bulbs, the same dimmers, everything, the same ballasts, and what Turrell is starting to do now with these space division pieces is, if you remember the image from inside the aperture, it had these right-angled corners. What he's now doing is he's coving these, he's rounding these off so that it gives this shadowless light. This creation of this Ganzfeld happens much easier. It also gives it a bit more lightness to the piece. So if we install it without these coved corners, then we've got somewhere to at least we can say, okay, this is what it was the last time that it was installed. We've got the numbers before we adjusted it, after we adjusted it, and we can at least take it to them and start some kind of a discussion saying, okay, this is what the consensus seemed to be by X percentage of people at the museum who recall the piece from all of these other incarnations. And now where do we go from there? We can start talking to the artist. Problem is that if he starts looking at a more reliable source of light, or if the technology changes too much, or if he decides to go with LED lights or neon, which he is with some of these pieces, and decides to cove the corners, we really are starting off at square one again we're just dealing with people's memories and recollections of this piece. We've got nothing.
And now that we've come full circle, see whether you have any questions. There's one.
Hi. I think I saw the show in its original incarnation, and I really don't envy you that task. Recreating it, did you ever consider bringing in an astronomer or those kinds of measuring devices for color temperature? Because then it wouldn't matter what the means of illumination was.
No, we haven't thought about that at all. I actually had no idea that you could. And to be honest, with this piece, I mean, with my lack of experience with these pieces beforehand, coming into it for this short period of time where it was actually up, I really felt like I was just grasping at handfuls of air, trying to figure out what am I supposed to be documenting? What's the art here? Is it the materials? Is it the idea? Is it the experience? And the thing that I've really come away with is that it's something completely different to everyone that I've talked to about it as well.
Over on the...
Terry Schaefer. Have you considered recording the light levels using radiometry, which actually records the energy of the light at different wavelengths, and recording the spectra of all the different lamps he's using? Because these are going to change over time. Manufacturers change them even though they might not say so. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a fine example of using radiometry rather than photometry to record the light energy. The other thing is that individual eyes adjust and burn up seeing blue, and it turns to pink anyway over time, and if he wants you to spend a long time in there, and everybody's eyes are different. So when you're recording what people recall or see, you're going to get a whole gamut of responses, no matter what lighting you're using. And you should also be checking the light energy outputs of the white lights. Are they the same as they were in the original? Are they the same bulbs? Have you a stock of 100 boxes of bulbs?
Well, no, they're, okay, I'll start backwards. The halogen bulbs are not the same bulbs either. We actually, in the initial contract, in the instructions of the materials, those were the ones that Matt Schreiber actually used. And then when James came, he changed those bulbs out to lower wattage bulbs so that he could dim them even further. So we've actually got conflicting data on what kind of bulbs we should be using. Should we be using these ones that the artist has used personally, or the ones that he originally specified? I think you were asking about documenting the bulb technology as well, and this was something that I had talked to James about, and this is an area where he's very curious and also very concerned about his pieces, is because the technology changes, who's keeping up with it and documenting what these companies are doing. I mean, he'll only use, I believe he just uses Philips and General Electric bulbs. He doesn't use Sylvania. But he doesn't specify why. At least he didn't specify why to me. But that is an area where he thinks that with these pieces, it would be a good idea to be able to track what the changes have been within the manufacturing and production of these bulbs, and see if there's a way to then take that to the documentation of the piece of why decisions were made, what decisions were made and why. Because at one point they started putting these gel sleeves onto the tubes to compensate, to give a different, or to try and bring the color closer, right?
So one more question. I think somebody has the microphone already. No. Is there a question? Yeah, down here.
I mean, has there been thought about making another one of these things so that whenever you need to calibrate, you have one that is only turned on for calibration as a sort of control?
Not to my knowledge. We're actually not even sure when this piece, if it will ever be reinstalled again.
Or at least the pieces.
You know, at this point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.